A billionaire visited the grave of his late son, who died of cancer, but there, he noticed someone watching him, a homeless girl who once knew his son. When he approached her, she revealed a secret that brought him to tears, and what he did next surprised everyone. The snow had fallen without mercy that morning, blanketing Hillside Cemetery in a pale, suffocating silence. Edward Halden stood motionless before the modest headstone that bore his son's name, Daniel Halden, 2007 to 2022. No titles, no epigraph. Just a name and 2 unrelentingly finite years. His leather gloves, despite the cost, failed to insulate his fingers from the cold marble he touched absently. He didn't speak. Not to the stone. Not to the air. Not to God. But then he saw her. A figure, huddled near the base of a pine tree a few yards away, her coat too thin, her legs drawn to her chest, her chin buried between threadbare mittens. Edward's immediate thought was that she was trespassing. Then he noticed the flowers. A small bouquet of frost-bitten marigolds, Daniel's favorite, set gently at the grave. And her eyes, red not from the cold, but from tears shed long before dawn. He approached cautiously. "Do you know him?" he asked, his voice clipped and unfamiliar. She looked up, startled but not frightened. Her features were sharp, too mature for her youth, etched with the residue of survival. She couldn't have been more than 17. "I didn't know he was gone," she murmured. "Until last week." He studied her. "Who are you?" The girl hesitated. "My name's Elise." "Elise what?" A long pause. "Elise Bennett." That name meant nothing to him. But her face, it triggered something. Not a memory. A resemblance. Then he saw it, the shape of her eyes. The curve of her cheek. A ghost of his son's features lived in her. "How did you know Daniel?" he asked again, this time not just curious, but demanding. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her jeans. "We met at the children's hospital. In the waiting room. 2 years ago." Edward's breath caught. Daniel had spent the better part of 6 months at St. Agnes for the cancer that eventually claimed him. He remembered many visits, many faces, but not hers. "I was there for my brother," she continued. "Leukemia. He didn't make it." Her voice didn't waver. It was as if the pain had calcified. "And Daniel?" "We talked. A lot. He gave me his juice once when I forgot mine. He said it was a crime not to drink apple juice during chemo." She gave a soft, sad laugh that landed somewhere between apology and reverence. "We weren't close. But I remembered him. Looked him up last week, after." She trailed off. Edward didn't know why the next words came out of him. "Why are you here now?" Elise glanced at the grave, then back at him. "To say goodbye. And because I had nowhere else to go last night." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I sleep behind the gas station on Greenway. The one near the old train tracks. It's quiet there." She said it like someone describing a park bench they favored, not homelessness. "You're sleeping on the streets?" His voice sharpened, louder than intended. She nodded, unashamed. "Since August." Edward stared at her, struggling to process. He owned 8 properties across the city. Flew first class even for domestic flights. Had a net worth north of $400 million. And yet this girl, this stranger, this shadow from his son's past, had slept beneath a gas station canopy during a winter storm. Something snapped loose in him. "Come with me," he said. She blinked. "Where?" "Someplace warm." He expected her to resist, to argue, to be suspicious. Instead, she studied his face carefully, as if measuring his soul. "Okay," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for a bit." Neither of them knew then what that bit would become. Or that within 24 hours, Edward would unlock a secret that had lain buried since his son's final summer. A secret that would bring a grown man to his knees in a flood of truth, and grief, and something dangerously close to love. The apartment Edward brought her to wasn't the penthouse on Beacon Hill, nor the restored Victorian where his ex-wife still lived. It was a third property, Technically a guest flat, rarely used, on the quieter edge of Back Bay. Clean, furnished, uninhabited. He hadn't thought about it in over a year. Elise didn't speak as they entered. She moved through the space with the quiet wariness of someone who had long learned to inspect every room for signs of risk. She touched nothing. Removed her shoes without being asked. Stood just inside the foyer, uncertain whether to sit or stand, like she might be reprimanded for doing either. "There's a shower," Edward said, breaking the silence. "And food in the fridge. I'll call someone to bring more." She looked at him, not with gratitude, but with the steeliness of a child who's learned not to rely on kindness. "I won't steal anything," she said flatly. "I didn't ask if you would." A beat passed. "I'll leave in the morning," she added. He ignored the statement. "How old are you, Elise?" 18, she lied. He raised a brow. 17.5, she corrected. "And your parents?" Her silence was answer enough. He nodded, stepped back, and gave her space. "The bedroom's down the hall. The door locks from the inside." She turned toward it, but paused. "Thank you, Mr. Halden." His stomach twisted. No one had said his name like that in months, not since Daniel's funeral. He watched her disappear into the room, the door closing gently behind her. Only once she was gone did he let the breath escape from his chest. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at a photo of Daniel from their last summer trip together. Cape Cod, 2022. Daniel's smile had been thinner then, his hair already beginning to fall out from the treatment, but his eyes had still held that kinetic gleam. The boy had been obsessed with music. Wrote lyrics in spiral notebooks, scribbled chords on the back of cereal boxes. Edward rose and crossed to a box in the closet. It hadn't been touched since the funeral. Inside, he found it, Daniel's final journal, half filled with erratic handwriting and tucked papers. He hadn't dared open it before. He did now. Most entries were mundane. Musings about school, sketches of guitars, half-written lyrics. But on the third page a name caught his eye. "Saw Elise again today. She always brings that orange notebook, like it's full of spells or secrets. Her brother looks worse. She doesn't cry though. She just sits there, like she's made of stone." Further down. "Told her about my theory that chemo turns us into mutants with powers. She said her power would be surviving. Mine too, I guess." Another page, dated mid-August. "Elise made me laugh today. First time in weeks. She said if we both make it, we'll meet in New York in 5 years and start a band. I told her I can't sing. She said that's okay. Neither can she." Edward felt something break inside him. How had he not known? How had she not told anyone? The final entry, dated 3 days before Daniel died, was just one sentence. "If I don't make it, I hope Elise does." The next morning, Elise was gone. The bedroom was left neatly. The blanket folded, the dishes and the sink rinsed. But she was gone. Edward swore softly and grabbed his coat. He found her hours later, back at the cemetery. Sitting cross-legged at Daniel's grave, the bouquet of marigolds replaced with fresh ones from a nearby florist. "You left," he said. "I needed to," she replied, not looking at him. "I read his journal," he said, softer now. "He wrote about you." She finally turned. "He wrote a lot. He said writing made him feel less afraid." Edward nodded, then hesitated. "You meant something to him." "He meant something to me," she whispered. "He saw me. When no one else did. Not even my mother." Silence stretched again. "Elise," he began, unsure how to say what came next. "There's something I need to ask. And I want the truth." She didn't answer, but her eyes met his squarely. "Are you—" He stopped. Regathered. "Did you and Daniel, was there ever a chance that—" "No," she said quietly. "We were just 2 kids holding each other's hands through the fire. That's all." He nodded, ashamed for even having asked. "I don't need anything from you," she added. Not money. Not pity. I just wanted to say goodbye to him in a way I couldn't before. Edward looked at her, really looked this time. At the girl who had sat beside his son in hospital corridors. Who had remembered him. Who had brought marigolds in the snow. And then he said the thing that surprised even himself. You don't have to leave. Her eyes widened, wary. I have a house, he said simply. One that's too big. And empty. And Daniel would have wanted me to offer it. What would people say? She asked, incredulous. I don't care what people say. She considered. Then asked, why are you really doing this? He swallowed hard. Because I think you might be the only part of him I have left. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she said, okay. The front hallway of Edward Halden's Beacon Hill townhouse had once echoed with the hurried footsteps of a boy late for school, his backpack thudding against the polished wooden stairs. Now, it echoed with silence as Elise stepped cautiously inside, her thrift store boots dripping melted snow onto the imported Persian rug. She carried no bags, just a folded coat and an old orange notebook, the one Daniel had written about in his journal. Edward didn't know why the sound of her steps unsettled him so deeply. Maybe because they were unfamiliar. Or maybe because they were a reminder of everything the house had lost. He showed her to the guest room. 3rd floor, past the landing where Daniel's childhood height had been marked in pencil up the doorframe, each notch a memory of a birthday or the end of another chemo round. This will be yours, he said. Elise ran a hand over the desk in the corner, eyes scanning the room. This was his room, wasn't it? No, Edward replied. His was next door. I haven't touched it. She didn't ask why. That night, Edward couldn't sleep again. He poured himself a scotch, then didn't drink it. Instead, he opened Daniel's old laptop, still kept in a drawer. Most files had been untouched since the boy's last hospital stay. Buried in a folder titled Junk was a video, timestamped 2 weeks before Daniel died. He clicked it. The screen lit up with Daniel's pale face, grinning despite the tubes taped to his chest. If you're watching this, you snooped. Congratulations, you've unlocked level, sad dad. He coughed hard, then smiled. Okay, real talk. I made this because I know I'm not going to win. And I'm scared you're going to go back to being Stone Man again. Stone Man. That was what Elise had called him when she first met him, Daniel once explained. A man carved from ice and grief. A man who never laughed. Dad, you work too much. You don't talk to people. You don't look at things unless they're on a spreadsheet. But Elise, she looks at the world like it still has good in it. So if you ever see her again, like if you're really watching this, don't shut her out. Don't do what you did with Mom. Just try, okay? Edward shut the laptop, his chest aching. It had taken death to make him listen. The following morning, Elise sat at the kitchen island eating toast and examining a stack of mail Edward had let pile up. Why don't you throw half this away? She asked, holding up a letter from the country club board. Because I don't like letting go, he said. She tilted her head. That's supposed to be profound? He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up one envelope and frowned. No return address. Heavy cream paper. His name in unfamiliar handwriting. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was small and careful. Asterisk Mr. Halden. I know this will come as a surprise, and I debated for weeks whether to write. But I think you deserve to know that Elise is my daughter. She doesn't know I'm sending this. She wouldn't approve. She left home 6 months ago, after a fight. Things had been difficult since her brother died. I wasn't there the way I should have been. Elise blamed me, and maybe she was right. I only found out she'd been staying near the cemetery after a friend recognized her. I don't want to interfere, but I also don't want her to disappear completely. I know what kind of man you are. I know you lost your son. Maybe that means you'll understand what I mean when I say, if she's there, don't let her go. Asterisk. Please take care of her. Even if she never forgives me. Rebecca Bennett. Edward stared at the letter. Her mother. Elise had never mentioned her. Had let him assume she had no one. He looked up and saw her watching him. "What's that?" she asked, nodding at the letter. He folded it carefully. "Just a reminder." "Of what?" "That the past always finds a way back." She frowned but didn't press. Later, he would debate telling her the truth. About the letter. About Rebecca. But for now, he folded the paper and placed it into the same drawer as Daniel's journal. Some truths required the right moment. And that moment had not yet come. Elise found the room next to hers by accident. She hadn't been snooping, just wandering. The door stood half open, as if forgotten. Inside, the air was stale with disuse, dust settled in every corner. But the room itself was untouched. Posters still adorned the walls, vintage rock bands, a sketch of a constellation Daniel had once claimed was his. A worn guitar leaned in the corner, pick still wedged between the strings. His scent lingered faintly beneath the dust, that mix of teenage deodorant and hospital-grade sanitizer. She didn't cry. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and placed her fingers on the strings. They buzzed slightly, unbalanced. She plucked once. Twice. Then reached for the notebook she always carried. The door creaked behind her. "You're not the first to come in here," Edward said. He stood with a cup of coffee, watching her without judgment. "I didn't mean to. I leave it open sometimes. On purpose." She nodded, understanding. "He was a good kid. He was better than I deserved," Edward said simply. "I think I failed him, near the end. I got so caught up in doctors and logistics that I stopped seeing him." Elise tilted her head. "He didn't think that. I read his lyrics." Edward raised an eyebrow. She smirked. "He used to ask me to grade them. Said my criticism was the most useful." That made Edward smile, for the first time in days. "He said you brought him juice during treatment." She shrugged. "He shared his pudding. We had a barter system." Edward sat down beside her, the bed creaking beneath his weight. "Elise," he said slowly, "have you considered going back to school? I dropped out at 16. Not because I wanted to. Just too much noise at home. There are programs. GEDs. Accelerated tracks. I can't afford them." He hesitated. "What if you didn't have to?" She looked at him, wary. "You're offering me charity." "No. I'm offering you a deal." She folded her arms. "You stay here. You finish your education. I cover tuition, housing, and food. In return, you get your diploma, maybe college, maybe not, but you try. You work. You learn. You don't owe me anything except the truth. When you're ready to go, you go." Elise didn't answer immediately. He went on. "I'm not trying to replace your family. Or Daniel. But he wanted the people he cared about to have a future. I think this is one way I can give that to you. No strings. Just structure." She stared at him. Finally. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. But not for lack of a chance." Her mouth twitched. "That's a very wealthy man thing to say. I've been called worse." Silence settled. "Okay," she said at last. "But if I'm staying here, I get to do something in return." "Like what?" She gestured around. "This house feels like a museum. Let me cook. Clean. Organize things. Give me a reason to get up in the morning." He didn't argue. Weeks passed. Elise enrolled in a GED program. Started volunteering at a library on weekends. She transformed the kitchen, rearranged shelves, labeled spices. She scrubbed the windows until they reflected sunlight again. When Edward came down one morning to find the foyer filled with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples, he realized he hadn't used the dining room in years. They didn't talk often, but when they did, it was real. One night, over tea, she asked, "Did you love your ex-wife?" He blinked. "I did. Once. Why did it end?" "I stopped showing up. In all the ways that mattered." Elise nodded slowly. My mom used to say love isn't enough. You have to show up. He didn't ask more about her mother. Still, the letter sat in his desk drawer, heavy as confession. Then one afternoon, while sorting mail, she froze. A plain envelope. No return address. But she knew the handwriting. Rebecca Bennett. Elise stared at it for a long time before bringing it to Edward's study. She found me, she said, holding it out like something fragile. He took it, but didn't open it. I don't want her back in my life, Elise said flatly. She says she wants you safe. She wanted that after she threw a lamp at my brother's memorial. Edward's face changed. She did what? It wasn't aimed at me. But it hit the photo display. Shattered the glass. She was drunk. He said nothing. She went on. I stayed until March. Then I couldn't anymore. I was better on the streets than there. Edward looked at the letter again. She doesn't know where you are, he said. I want it to stay that way. I can make sure it does. She nodded. Thank you. As she left, Edward opened the envelope in private. The letter inside was short. If she's there, tell her I'm sorry. Not just for that night. For every moment after. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope she finds what I couldn't give her. He folded the letter and burned it in the fireplace. Some bridges, he thought, weren't worth rebuilding. In early spring, Elise found herself drawn to Daniel's room more often. Not to grieve, not exactly. But to think. To sit in the stillness where memory clung to the walls like quiet wallpaper. She had cleaned the space carefully, never removing, only dusting, folding, preserving. The notebook of lyrics sat neatly on the nightstand now. The guitar had been rest-strung. She'd started learning, slowly, clumsily, the way Daniel once had. She never said it aloud, but this room made her feel protected. On a Thursday afternoon, Edward came home earlier than usual and found her there, sitting with the guitar in her lap, plucking at a chord that refused to ring true. You're not half bad, he said from the doorway. I'm terrible, she replied, not looking up. But he would have laughed at me for trying. I think he would have said the effort matters more. She looked up then, narrowing her eyes. You keep guessing what he would have said? Edward paused. Because I can't stop wondering what I missed. She set the guitar aside gently. You didn't miss as much as you think. Daniel didn't let people in easily. Neither do you, he said quietly. A beat passed. Then, as if shaken by an invisible wind, Elise stood and crossed the room. I got something in the mail today. From the hospital. He tensed. Are you all right? It was a referral. She handed him a small slip of paper. Routine checkup. They said they'd been trying to contact my listed guardian and got no answer. I forgot I used my mother's name when I registered for the GED. But they sent this to your address. Edward read the form, then looked up. I can change the contact information if it's a problem. He shook his head. No. You should list someone who actually shows up. That evening, as Elise prepared dinner, spaghetti with garlic bread, a surprisingly competent effort, Edward reviewed the estate documents tucked in his private file drawer. It was a habit he'd formed after Daniel's death. A way of staying in control, or maybe just rehearsing mortality. But now, something shifted. The next morning, he met with his attorney. Add a clause, he said, that if anything happens to me, she, Elise, is to be taken care of. Housing, tuition, medical. Unconditionally. The attorney raised an eyebrow. Any legal connection? Guardianship? No. She's not a relative? Edward hesitated. Then said, she's not blood. But she's family. The days that followed settled into quiet rhythms. Elise passed her first 2 GED subjects. Edward found himself looking forward to her evening updates, the ones she gave while poring over her orange notebook, annotating terms like she was cataloging spells. But then one Saturday morning, something arrived in the mail that unraveled all their silence. It was a manila envelope, hand-delivered. Inside, a DNA test kit. No return label, but Elise knew immediately. She stared at it in the foyer, knuckles white. Edward saw her from the stairs. Elise? She turned, holding the kid up. She wants proof. He came down slowly. Your mother? She nodded. She wants to drag me back into court, claim I ran away, get custody again. She thinks she can get money out of it. Edward exhaled slowly. She can't. You're a legal adult in 4 months. She wants to prove I'm not even hers, Elise said flatly. That my father, whoever he was, is the one responsible for me. Edward froze. I don't know who he is, Elise said, as if anticipating the question. She never told me. Just said he was nobody. A mistake. He hesitated. Then he asked carefully, Would you want to know? She met his eyes. I used to. Now? I don't care. Whoever he was, he didn't stay. Edward said nothing. Instead, he took the envelope and tossed it onto the entry table. This house is yours until you choose otherwise. No test changes that. She watched him a moment longer. Then, to his surprise, she reached forward and hugged him, briefly, tightly, like a reflex. Thanks, she said, stepping back. For not needing proof. Edward stood there long after she'd gone to the kitchen, staring at the envelope, wondering how many lives had been twisted by people demanding proof of things that could never be tested. By late April, Boston began to thaw. Sidewalks once treacherous with black ice softened into damp, gray slush. Edward had taken to walking in the early mornings again, something he hadn't done since Daniel was alive. He wore the same coat his son had bought him one Christmas, cheap and slightly too big, with a note pinned inside the pocket that simply read, For when you finally stop pretending you hate the cold. That morning, he returned from his walk to find Elise in the kitchen, hair wet from a shower, scribbling in her notebook while waiting for the kettle to boil. Her presence had become as normal as the clink of dishes or the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore, it was companionable. Until the doorbell rang. Edward opened it without thinking. And there, on the front step, stood a man in his 50s. He wore a cheap blazer and a grim expression. His eyes were sharp. Familiar somehow. Edward Halden? The man asked. Yes. I'm Colin Archer. I believe I'm Elise Bennett's father. The world shifted. Edward closed the door behind them with a heavy thud. Elise stood just inside the foyer, frozen. You're what? She asked, voice flat. Colin took a slow breath. Your mother and I were together briefly. Years ago. I didn't know you existed until 2 months ago. Rebecca, she sent me a message. Told me she wasn't sure, but thought I might be the father. Elise didn't blink. And you just believed her? I took a test, he said simply. It came back positive. Edward stepped in. Why are you here now? Colin's eyes moved between them. I don't want anything. No money. No custody. I just wanted to meet her. Once. To see who she is. Elise didn't move. You're 18 years late. I know. She stared at him for a long time. Then, with brutal clarity, you don't get to show up now and pretend this matters. Colin swallowed. I don't want to pretend. I'm sorry. For not being there. Even if I didn't know, I'm sorry. Elise looked like she might speak. But instead, she turned and walked up the stairs. Colin stood there, unsure. Edward said quietly, She doesn't need anything from you. Least of all more damage. I didn't come to damage anything. I just needed to see her. Once. Edward held the man's gaze. Then, now you have. Colin nodded. If she ever wants to talk, ever, I'll leave my number. Edward didn't take the paper. Colin left it on the entry table anyway. After the door shut behind him, Edward stood there for a long moment. Upstairs, he found Elise in Daniel's room, sitting on the bed, her face blank. I'm not mad, she said when he entered. You have every right to be. I don't feel anything. Isn't that worse? Edward sat beside her. Sometimes the numbness is just grief waiting for a way out. I don't want a new father, she said. I don't want any father. He didn't respond right away. Then, you don't have to want one. You just need to want yourself. She looked down at the floor. I think I'm tired of starting over. You're not starting over, Edward said. You're continuing. After a long pause, she leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. Not an embrace. Just contact. Something living. Then she stood, brushed past him, and returned to her studies. On the hallway table downstairs, the slip of paper with Colin's number remained untouched. That night, Edward folded it and placed it next to the letter from Rebecca in the drawer he never opened. Some truths weren't erased. They were simply endured. The morning of the GED exam arrived gray and cold, a final reminder that Boston's spring was never generous. Elise stood in front of the mirror, dressed simply, jeans, a gray sweater, and her ever-present orange notebook tucked into her backpack. She didn't speak during breakfast. Edward didn't push. He watched her with quiet pride, noticing the difference not just in her posture but in the steadiness of her eyes. She looked like someone who had been through fire and come out shaped by it, not broken. You'll do well, he said as she gathered her things. I'm not worried about the test, she replied, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I'm worried about what happens after. Edward tilted his head. What do you mean? I've been surviving for so long, I don't know what comes next when I'm not just getting through. He paused. Then, with the careful patience of a man learning fatherhood late in life, he said, Then we figure it out. One step at a time. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You sound like Daniel. He looked away, the ache in his chest as familiar now as breathing. I'll be back by 3, she said, already at the door. I'll be here. The exam took 4 hours. When it ended, Elise walked out into sunlight and the shock of silence. No more prep. No more vocabulary cards. No more past paper drills. She didn't feel relief. Not yet. She felt like someone stepping out of a bunker after a war, unsure whether peace was real. At home, the townhouse was unusually quiet. Edward? She called. No answer. She checked the kitchen. Then the living room. His coat was gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter. Went to visit Daniel. Be back before dinner. She set her bag down, the weight of the day suddenly overwhelming. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window, watching Boston's streets move on without her. When the knock came, she assumed it was a neighbor or a delivery. But when she opened the door, her throat tightened. Rebecca stood on the porch. Hair straighter than she remembered. Lips tight. A coat that was too thin for the weather. I need 5 minutes, Rebecca said. Elise didn't move. You sent a stranger to my door. He's your father. You gave up the right to use that word. Rebecca didn't argue. He wanted to meet you. I let him. That was all. Elise stood in the doorway, unmoving. Why are you here? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. Because I heard you're living here. With him. With Edward Halden. And I know what that looks like. A rich man taking in a homeless girl. I needed to see you with my own eyes. Make sure you're okay. Elise's laugh was bitter. You're 2 years too late for that. Rebecca stepped closer. I know I failed you. You didn't fail, Elise said. You left. Every day you chose a bottle over us. Over me. You told me not to cry at my brother's funeral because it made you look weak. I don't care what guilt you've suddenly found. I don't owe you anything. I don't want anything. Rebecca whispered. I don't sleep. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I wanted to say, don't. Rebecca blinked. Elise's voice dropped. Don't say you're sorry. Not unless you're sober. Not unless you've changed. Not unless you're willing to prove it with something more than 5 minutes on a stranger's porch. The words hung between them like cold air. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then stepped back. I'll leave my number. If you ever. No, Elise said quietly. If I want to find you, I will. And she shut the door. Edward returned just after 5. Elise was sitting at the kitchen island, a half-written song in front of her, untouched tea beside it. He could tell, immediately, something had happened. She came, Elise said before he could ask. My mother. He froze. Did she? She's gone now. He approached cautiously. Did she say anything? Enough. Elise looked up. You knew she'd find me eventually? Yes. I think part of me wanted her to. He nodded. Did you get what you wanted? She shook her head. But I think I gave her what she needed. Closure. Maybe that's more important. He didn't speak, just poured her a fresh cup of tea. Elise looked at him. You know, this thing between us. It's not normal. No, he said. It's not. I'm not your daughter. You're not my guardian. We don't have any labels that make sense. He nodded. But I trust you, she said. And I think I need you in my life. He set the teapot down. Then stay. She paused. I got my results back next week. If I pass, you will. Then I want to try college. Maybe music. Maybe social work. I don't know yet. You don't have to know. She smiled faintly. That's the thing. For the first time in years, I'm not afraid to not know. They stood there in silence. The evening sun poured into the kitchen. The mask, long ago constructed by trauma, fear, and survival, had finally come off. Not with fanfare, but with the quiet unfolding of trust. On the last day of May, Elise received an envelope marked in the distinctive serif lettering of the Massachusetts Department of Education. Her GED results had arrived. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she made tea, properly this time, steeped not steeping, and carried the envelope upstairs to Daniel's room. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, the sealed results in one hand, her other resting lightly on the guitar case. You'd probably say something dumb right now, she murmured to the air. Like open it, nerd. The paper trembled in her hand as she tore it gently along the seam. Passed. All 5 subjects. High percentile. Elise exhaled. Not in triumph, not even relief, just a release of something older than fear. The sound a lock makes when it finally clicks open. Edward was in the conservatory, pruning a stubborn orchid, when she found him. Got it, she said simply. He looked up. And? She handed him the sheet. He didn't speak. Just nodded once. Pride visible not in words but in the careful way he set the paper down, like it deserved its own frame. What now? He asked. Community college. Start in the fall. Music? Maybe. Or psychology. I've been thinking about that too. He smiled. That makes sense. You're good at understanding people. She hesitated, then added, I've been writing something. A song. For Daniel. Edward's expression shifted, softened. I don't know if it's any good. But it's real. That's the only kind of good that matters. Later that week, Edward met again with his attorney. I want to amend the will, he said. More updates? The lawyer asked. You've already ensured Elise will be taken care of. Edward shook his head. It's not enough. He slid a document across the table. A draft he'd written himself the night Elise passed her exams. The lawyer read it, then looked up slowly. You want to name her as primary heir? I do. She's not legally adopted. I know. No blood ties. No formal guardianship. Still. The lawyer sat back. This will cause problems. There are distant relatives, trustees, board members, who won't like it. Edward folded his hands. Let them not like it. You're certain? Edward nodded once. I've built companies. Legacies. But Elise? She's the only person I've seen fight for a future the way I fought for an empire. If anything I built is worth inheriting, it's her life I wanted to support. The lawyer scribbled a note. Then I'll make it happen. When Edward told Elise, she didn't react the way he expected. She didn't cry. Didn't protest. She simply looked at him and said, "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you never asked for anything." She was silent for a moment. Then, "I don't need your money." "I know. But I'll accept the gesture. Because someday I might help someone else the way you helped me. And that's the only legacy worth carrying." Edward smiled. "Then I've made the right choice." That night, Elise played her song in Daniel's room. The melody was simple. Raw. The kind that didn't need lyrics to tell you it came from someplace real. Edward listened from the hallway, unseen, his hand resting on the doorframe. The notes filled the house slowly, like sunlight returning to a long-forgotten place. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost a son. He felt like a man who had found someone worth staying alive for. Elise didn't leave the house much that summer. Not because she had nowhere to go, but because, for the first time, the idea of home wasn't a question mark. She spent her mornings on the balcony, scribbling lyrics into the orange notebook. Afternoons volunteering at the music library, shelving sheet music and answering questions from middle schoolers learning trumpet for the first time. In the evenings, she cooked dinner for two. Nothing elaborate. Pasta, stir-fry, baked chicken. It wasn't about food. It was about conversation. Consistency. The quiet rhythm of routine that made the air easier to breathe. Edward adapted too. He downsized his work schedule, shifted board meetings to phone calls, stopped checking market tickers during meals. He never said it out loud, but the townhouse felt warmer now, as if the walls themselves had relaxed their grip on memory. One Friday, while cleaning out the garage, Elise found a box labeled simply, "Halden Estate, Archive A." She brought it to the kitchen, curious. Inside, photos. Dozens. Of Daniel as a toddler, smeared with finger paint, as a boy, grinning at a science fair beside a project made of spoons and LED lights. Photos of Edward too, smiling, even laughing, caught in candid moments. She picked one up. Edward and Daniel on a fishing boat, both squinting into the wind, arms linked, cheeks windburned. She took it to the living room. "You kept these," she said as she handed him the photo. Edward looked at it for a long time. "I couldn't look at them after he died." "But you didn't throw them away." "No." He paused. "I think I knew, someday, I'd need to remember the parts that didn't hurt." Elise sat across from him. "We could frame them. The good ones. Put them up in the hallway. Not as a shrine. Just so the silence isn't so loud." He considered this. Then nodded. They worked on the project together. Elise chose the photos. Edward handled the frames. By July, the hallway had changed. Gone were the sterile museum walls. In their place, a curated history. Laughter, paper crowns, awkward braces, sunlit vacations. Visitors noticed. So did the staff who came by once a month to dust and check security systems. The silence had become something different now. Not grief. Not regret. Something closer to peace. At the end of July, Edward received a letter from the Board of Trustees at Halden and Company. It was time, they said. Time to name a successor. He was approaching 70. Shareholders were eager for long-term clarity. He read the letter at breakfast and didn't mention it until dinner. "They want a decision," he told Elise, pushing a plate of roasted vegetables toward her. "You're going to retire?" she asked, surprised. "I think so. The company will go on. But I'm not sure I'd belong in that world anymore." She took a bite, chewed slowly. "Then what will you do?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Live." It was that simple. On the last evening of summer, they stood on the townhouse balcony as dusk settled over the Charles River. Elise had her guitar. Edward had a glass of wine. Either of them spoke for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Do you think I've changed?" Edward glanced at her. "You're stronger." "I don't feel stronger. I just feel different." He nodded. That's how strength works. A pause. Elise, he said carefully, have you thought about what it means that you're inheriting my estate? She nodded. I'm not afraid of the responsibility. I just want to use it well. I know you will. She looked at him, her voice quiet. Thank you? For not trying to turn me into someone else. For letting me be this. Edward's reply was almost a whisper. You saved me too. They stood there until the stars came out. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday in September, sealed in heavy paper, stamped with the insignia of the Massachusetts College of Arts. Elise held it in both hands, thumb resting over her name printed in elegant serif. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on the back steps of the townhouse, barefoot, coffee cooling beside her, her orange notebook closed for once. Edward found her there minutes later, sensing, without needing to ask, that the moment was not about suspense, but gravity. You already know what it says, he murmured. Elise looked up. Yeah. I think I do. Still, when she opened it and read the first line, we are pleased to offer you admission, her breath caught anyway. She handed him the letter. He read it, then folded it neatly and gave it back. Looks like Boston gets to keep you a little longer, he said. Looks like. She smiled. The night before classes began, Edward made dinner. It was terrible. The pasta overcooked. The sauce too thin. The garlic bread, somehow, both underdone and burnt. But Elise said nothing. She just sat across from him, laughing as she took another bite of rubbery spaghetti. You know, she said, we could always order takeout and pretend this never happened. No, Edward said seriously. This is tradition now. Terrible food on the eve of new beginnings. She raised her glass of juice. He his wine. To new beginnings, she said. To the ones we earn, he added. They clinked glasses. She started classes the next day. Morning commute. Earbuds. Textbooks. Coffee with too much sugar. Notes taken in careful, looping script. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. In the evenings, she returned to the townhouse. To Edward, who asked about her professors, her classmates, her compositions. She told him everything. Not because she owed him anything, but because he'd become her witness. The only one who'd seen her before and after, and stayed. One night, late in October, she brought home a new song. One she hadn't played for anyone. She sat at the piano Daniel had once touched but never learned. Edward sat in his chair, listening. It was a lullaby. Soft. Wistful. When she finished, she looked at him. What should I call it? She asked. He didn't hesitate. The first real home. She nodded. Then added quietly, I think he would have liked it. Edward didn't speak. He just reached for her hand and held it. Not tightly. Just enough. Years later, journalists would refer to Elise Bennett Halden as a prodigy turned philanthropist. A musician who never sought fame but whose compositions were studied, celebrated, and played in quiet, healing spaces around the world. She never corrected the hyphen in her last name. It was never legal. Never official. But when asked about it, she always said the same thing. He didn't give me a name. He gave me a future. At Daniel's grave, each year on the anniversary of his death, she left a single marigold and a folded piece of sheet music. Edward always came too. Never speaking, always listening. Some stories don't end with fireworks or fame. Some just continue, quietly, fiercely, like a melody that never stops playing in the heart of a house where love, once lost, returned in a new form. Where a homeless girl found warmth beside a grave. And a grieving father learned how to live again.